Gancho viral, a massive figure dragging something through the snow. It wasn't an animal. It has been 40 years, and the forest still knows my name. The snow still whispers secrets I was never meant to hear. I should have died that night, but something else chose otherwise. If I told you the truth, you would not believe me. No one ever has. Before we begin, consider subscribing, and let me know in the comments where you are listening from. My name is Richard, and I was a wildlife biologist, a man of the woods, for nearly 2 decades. I spent my late 30s and early 40s mapping migration routes, tracking elusive predators, and cataloging rare flora in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. My marriage, a casualty of my deep-seated devotion to the silent green cathedral of the forest, had long since dissolved, leaving me with a quiet loneliness that the rustling leaves and the crisp mountain air seemed to understand better than any human ever could. I found solace in long shifts, the biting cold of winter mornings, and the endless cycle of life and death that played out far from paved roads. I slept in my beat-up Ford F-150 more often than my small, isolated cabin, the scent of pine needles and damp earth a constant companion. The deepest truths often hide in plain sight, just beyond the edge of what we dare to believe. This was my life, a solitary existence, until the winter of 2012. The disturbance began subtly, as these things always do. I was checking a series of trail cameras deep in a remote, snow-covered valley, a place so isolated the silence pressed in on you, thick and heavy. The air was frigid, biting at my exposed skin, and the snow lay in an unbroken blanket, reflecting the pale winter sun. As I cycled through the images on the small screen, a familiar routine, my breath caught in my throat. My knees weakened, and an old primal instinct screamed at me to run, to drop everything and disappear. The camera, positioned near a game trail, had captured an image. Not of a deer, not a bear, but a massive, indistinct figure, hunched over, dragging something dark and heavy through the pristine snow. It was not an animal, not one I had ever known. The first layer of dread settled in as I replayed the footage, the date stamp confirming it was from just 2 nights prior. The air, already cold, seemed to drop another 10 degrees. A faint, musky scent, like wet fur mixed with something subtly sweet and rotten, clung to the crisp air, even though there was nothing visible. The forest around me was unnaturally silent, the usual chatter of jays and squirrels conspicuously absent. It was as if every living creature held its breath, sensing a presence I could not yet see. I scanned the tree line, feeling an intense weight in the air, a sense of being watched from the dense thicket of firs and hemlocks. Driven by a morbid curiosity that overruled my fear, I followed the faint trail left in the snow. The second layer of evidence materialized quickly. The footprints were enormous, far larger than any grizzly, and distinctly bipedal, with an unusual splay to the toes. They led directly to a section of forest where branches, impossibly high, had been snapped clean off, not broken, but twisted with immense force. The ground was disturbed not just by the dragging but by a series of peculiar stone stacks, some 3 feet high, arranged in a rough semicircle. They seemed ancient, almost deliberate. The trail of the dragged object itself was wide and deep, a dark furrow in the white landscape, implying incredible weight. I remembered the old saying, "The deepest truths often hide in plain sight, just beyond the edge of what we dare to believe." It echoed in my mind. The third layer was behavioral, and it was the most unsettling. As I continued, a profound sense of being stalked settled over me. I would catch fleeting glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, just beyond the edge of the dense evergreens. A shadow that lingered too long, a branch that swayed without wind. It felt less like an animal trying to hide and more like an intelligent entity observing, measuring. The dragged object's trail ended abruptly at the mouth of a hidden cave, partially obscured by snowdrifts and ancient fallen trees. Inside the cave, the musky smell was overpowering, and there, partially covered by a rough pile of branches, was the object. It was a human-sized figure, clearly injured, its form wrapped in what looked like animal hides. It was not moving. I stumbled out of the cave, gasping for air, the cold doing little to clear my head. When I finally made it back to civilization, I reported my findings to Sheriff Miller, a man whose face was as weathered as the mountain roads. He listened patiently, his gaze unwavering, but his eyes held a familiar skepticism. "Richard," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, "we've had bear sightings, even a few cougar attacks. People get lost up there too. Hallucinations are common in isolation." He suggested it was a large bear dragging a deer, or perhaps a lost hiker, disoriented and suffering from hypothermia. The official explanation was always logical, always incomplete. He filed a report, but I knew, even as I spoke, that he did not believe a single word. Driven by an unshakable need for understanding, I returned to the valley 2 days later, the memory of those eyes, those footprints, burning in my mind. The foggy valley seemed to swallow the light, the air thick with moisture that condensed with every shaky breath I took. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, a frantic drum against the silence. I felt the familiar weight of unseen eyes, an intense pressure from the dense forest, flashbacks of my youth, of feeling utterly alone even in a crowd, of my failed marriage and the silent spaces between us, merged with the present dread. I felt the presence drawing closer, a heavy footfall in the snow just behind me. Yet when I spun around, nothing was there. The deepest truths often hide in plain sight just beyond the edge of what we dare to believe. Then, at the mouth of the cave, it was there. Standing tall, perhaps 9 feet, a silhouette against the pale snow, its form covered in dark, matted fur. It was not a bear, not a primate. Its shoulders were broad, its posture ancient, almost regal. Its eyes, deep-set and dark, held an intelligence that shocked me to my core. They were not animal eyes. They were knowing, filled with an ancient sorrow and a profound silent warning. In its powerful arms it cradled the injured figure from the camera footage, now revealed to be undeniably human-like but larger, broader, its face obscured by shadows and hides. Bigfoot let out a low, guttural vocalization, a sound that vibrated through my very bones. Not a roar of aggression, but a deep, resonant communication of protection and warning. It moved with a fluid grace that defied its massive size, turning its head slowly, its gaze fixed on me, before retreating into the deeper darkness of the cave. Time slowed, then snapped back into place. After that night, I could not go back to my old life. The forest, once my sanctuary, became a place of haunting truth. I resigned from my position, citing personal reasons, a vague explanation that satisfied no one. Sheriff Miller quietly closed the case, listing the missing figure as a presumed hiker lost to the elements. My nightmares were relentless, filled with those ancient knowing eyes and the image of that massive figure carrying its injured kin. I isolated myself, the guilt of what I had seen, of the truth I possessed but could not share, corroding my soul. Decades have passed since that winter night. My hands tremble as I speak, my voice thin and reedy with age. The regret is a constant companion, but so is the profound gratitude for having witnessed something so impossible, so ancient. The deepest truths often hide in plain sight, just beyond the edge of what we dare to believe. I know what I saw. Some things in those woods were never meant for us, but they are still out there, waiting. If this story moved you, consider subscribing. Stay safe out there. The words hung in the cold air of my small cabin, echoing faintly. My voice, thin and reedy as it was, had finally given form to the truth I had carried for so many decades. The silence that followed felt heavier than usual, a thick blanket woven from the unspoken and the unbelievable. My hands, gnarled with age and the countless hours spent in the unforgiving wilderness, trembled slightly as I lowered the old, worn microphone. It was done. The confession, the memory, the haunting truth, it was all out there now, cast into the digital ether, a whisper hoping to find an ear that might, just might, listen without judgment. I leaned back in my creaking wooden chair, the springs groaning in protest, a familiar sound in this solitary existence. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn log walls. Outside, the wind, a constant companion in these parts, began to pick up, rattling the single pane of glass in my window. It was a mournful sound, one that had often mirrored the quiet ache in my soul. For so long, that ache had been compounded by the burden of my secret, a truth so profound it had shattered my life into before and after. Now, having spoken it aloud, I felt a strange mixture of relief and an even deeper, more profound vulnerability. What would happen next? Would anyone truly believe a man whose life had been consumed by the wilderness, whose only companions for years had been the silent trees and the distant calls of unseen creatures? Sheriff Miller, God rest his soul, had dismissed me as a hallucinating recluse. The world I knew preferred its truths neatly packaged, its mysteries solved, its monsters confined to fiction, yet I knew what I had seen. The eyes, those ancient, knowing eyes, were as real to me now as the trembling of my own hands. The image of that massive figure, cradling its injured kin, was etched into the very fabric of my memory, a permanent scar on my psyche. I closed my eyes, the warmth from the fire doing little to chase away the deep-seated chill that had settled in my bones since that winter of 2012. It wasn't just the cold of the forest. It was the cold of a truth too vast for human comprehension. For years, every rustle in the leaves, every snap of a twig outside my cabin had sent a jolt of primal fear through me. Was it a deer, a bear, or was it them? The watchful intelligence I had felt in the forest had never truly left me. It had simply retreated to the edges of my perception, a silent sentinel in the vast, green cathedral I once called my sanctuary. Opening my eyes, I gazed out the window, past the flickering reflection of the fire. The first stars were beginning to prick through the fading twilight, tiny pinpricks of light in an endless canvas. The forest, dark and imposing, stretched out beyond my small clearing, an impenetrable wall of ancient secrets. I had abandoned my life, my career, my connections to the human world, all to guard this truth, to live with it in quiet solitude. The guilt had been a heavy cloak, the knowledge that such a profound mystery existed, yet I could do nothing but witness it and then hide. Now that cloak had been partially shed, but with its removal came a new kind of exposure. Had I simply invited more scrutiny, more ridicule? Or worse, had I drawn their attention once more? The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through me, a familiar tightening in my chest. Some things I had always believed were better left undisturbed, hidden in the deep, silent places of the world. Yet the urge to speak, to share what I had experienced, had become an overwhelming current in my later years. It was a desperate plea for understanding, a final act of testimony before my own time in this world ran out. I rose slowly, my joints protesting with soft clicks and groans. My gaze drifted to an old, faded photograph on the mantelpiece, a younger me, vibrant and full of the scientific curiosity that had once defined my existence. Beside me stood my ex-wife, her smile a ghost from a life long past, a life that had dissolved under the weight of my obsession, my isolation. She had never understood my devotion to the wilderness, and she certainly would never have understood the impossible truth I had found there. The cabin felt emptier now somehow, despite the words I had just filled it with. It was as if the act of speaking had created a void, a space for whatever might come next. I walked to the front door, my hand resting on the cold metal knob. The faint, musky scent from that fateful day, a smell I had never truly forgotten, seemed to linger on the crisp night air, a phantom presence. I knew it was likely just my mind playing tricks, connecting the act of remembering with the sensations of the past. But in these woods, in this life I had chosen, some things were never just tricks of the mind. I opened the door, a rush of cold air invading the small warm space. The forest stood silent, dark and ancient. It still knew my name, and now, perhaps, it knew I had finally broken my silence. I stepped out onto the small porch, my eyes scanning the tree line, a habit ingrained over decades. Nothing moved, yet I felt it, that familiar, intense pressure from the dense thicket of firs and hemlocks. They were still out there. And now, my story was out there too. I just hoped it wouldn't bring the wilderness and its deepest truths too close to my doorstep once more. The words hung in the cold air of my small cabin, echoing faintly. My voice, thin and reedy as it was, had finally given form to the truth I had carried for so many decades. The silence that followed felt heavier than usual, a thick blanket woven from the unspoken and the unbelievable. My hands, gnarled with age and the countless hours spent in the unforgiving wilderness, trembled slightly as I lowered the old, worn microphone. It was done. The confession, the memory, the haunting truth. It was all out there now, cast into the digital ether, a whisper hoping to find an ear that might listen without judgment. What would happen next? Would anyone truly believe a man whose life had been consumed by the wilderness, whose only companions for years had been the silent trees and the distant calls of unseen creatures? Sheriff Miller, rest his soul, had dismissed me as a hallucinating recluse. The world I knew preferred its truths neatly packaged, its mysteries solved, its monsters confined to fiction. Yet I knew what I had seen. The eyes, those ancient, knowing eyes, were as real to me now as the trembling of my own hands. The image of that massive figure, cradling its injured kin, was etched into the very fabric of my memory, a permanent scar on my psyche. I closed my eyes, the warmth from the fire doing little to chase away the deep-seated chill that had settled in my bones since that winter of 2012. It wasn't just the cold of the forest, it was the cold of a truth too vast for human comprehension. For years, every rustle in the leaves, every snap of a twig outside my cabin, had sent a jolt of primal fear through me. Was it a deer, a bear, or was it them? The watchful intelligence I had felt in the forest had never truly left me. It had simply retreated to the edges of my perception, a silent sentinel in the vast green cathedral I once called my sanctuary. I rose slowly, my joints protesting with soft clicks and groans. My gaze drifted to an old faded photograph on the mantelpiece, a younger me, vibrant and full of the scientific curiosity that had once defined my existence. Beside me stood my ex-wife Bianca, her smile a ghost from a life long past, a life that had dissolved under the weight of my obsession, my isolation. She had never understood my devotion to the wilderness, and she certainly would never have understood the impossible truth I had found there. The next morning, the cabin was still quiet, the online world a distant hum I rarely engaged with. I ate my usual breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee, the same routine I had followed for years. 2 days later, my old flip phone, a relic I kept for emergencies, buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the worn buttons. It was Robert, a former colleague from the Forest Service, a man whose skepticism was as legendary as his love for regulations. His voice, when I finally answered, was a blend of concern and thinly veiled amusement. "Richard, I saw your video," Robert began, a pause hanging heavy between us. "Are you all right? You've been out there a long time, old friend. The isolation can play tricks on a man." He spoke of hallucinations and the stress of a solitary life, echoing Sheriff Miller's words from so long ago. He offered to drive up to check on me, a gesture I knew came from a place of genuine worry, but also from a desire to rationalize what he'd heard. I politely declined, my voice calm despite the tremor in my hands. I knew he wouldn't understand. No one ever truly had. He just couldn't see the unseen. After the call, I felt a familiar ache, a loneliness that had deepened with every passing year. Robert meant well, but his world, neatly ordered and scientifically explained, had no room for what I had witnessed. My truth was too big, too wild for his understanding. I walked to the edge of my property, the snow crunching under my boots. The forest loomed, silent and watchful. I had spoken my truth, cast it into the digital winds, but the world, it seemed, was not ready to listen. And the wilderness, in its ancient wisdom, remained an enigma, its secrets guarded by the very beings I had dared to reveal. My old flip phone, a relic I kept for emergencies, buzzed again a day after Robert's call. It was an unknown number, and I let it ring, watching the small screen vibrate on the worn wooden table. The silence of my cabin felt amplified, broken only by the crackle of the hearth fire. My conversation with Robert had left a sour taste, a reminder of the chasm between my reality and the world's need for neat scientific explanations. He meant well, I knew, in his own way, but his concern felt like an accusation, a judgment on my sanity. He just couldn't see the unseen. No one ever could. I walked to the window, the glass cold against my fingertips, and gazed out at the forest. The snow, pristine and untouched, stretched towards the distant tree line, reflecting the pale winter sun. It was a beautiful, deceptive silence, one that held ancient secrets and watchful eyes. For decades, this view had been my sanctuary, my prison, and my only truth. My ex-wife, Bianca, had left me long ago, her patience worn thin by my obsession with the wilderness, an obsession that deepened into a solitary quest for meaning after that fateful winter of 2012. She would never have understood the impossible truth I carried. The phone stopped ringing. A moment later, a text message appeared on the tiny screen. "Richard, it's Robert. Please call me back. I'm genuinely worried." I sighed, a long, weary exhalation that misted in the cold air of the cabin. My truth, once a heavy cloak, was now a beacon, drawing unwanted attention. The vulnerability I felt after confessing my story to the digital world was profound, a new kind of exposure. I had hoped for understanding, for a single voice in the vast ether that might resonate with my experience. Instead, I was met with the predictable skepticism of a world that preferred its mysteries solved, its monsters confined to fiction. I picked up the phone, my gnarled fingers tracing the raised numbers. I considered calling him back, explaining, trying once more to bridge the gap. But what was there to say? How could I articulate the feeling of ancient intelligence in those deep-set eyes, the guttural warning that vibrated through my bones, the profound sorrow in a creature the world refused to acknowledge? The words would fall flat, twisted into the ravings of an old man lost to the woods. It was a battle I had fought for 40 years, a battle I was too old and too tired to fight again. Instead, I walked to my old wooden desk, its surface scarred by years of use, and pulled out a worn leather-bound journal. The pages were filled with my cramped handwriting, observations, sketches, and dates. It was my true confession, the raw, unfiltered account of everything I had seen and felt. The trail camera footage was only a glimpse, a fragment of a much larger, more terrifying mosaic. I had documented everything, from the unusual splay of the footprints to the impossible height of the broken branches, to the peculiar stone stacks that seemed ancient and deliberate. The musky scent, like wet fur mixed with something sweet and rotten, was a detail I could still conjure in my mind even now. I opened the journal to a fresh page, my pen poised. The digital confession was out there, a fragile whisper, but the real story, the one that unfolded in these pages, was mine alone. I had lived with the guilt of witnessing something so profound and then hiding it, allowing the official narrative of a lost hiker to stand. Now that burden was partially lifted, but a new one had taken its place. The burden of being misunderstood, of being seen as a madman. My gaze drifted to a small, framed photograph on the corner of the desk. It was from my early 40s, a younger, more vibrant me, standing proudly beside my Ford F-150, deep in the Pacific Northwest wilderness. My eyes in the photo still held the spark of scientific curiosity, before it was replaced by awe and dread. That man, the one who believed in logic and reason, had been shattered that winter. He had been replaced by this man, an old recluse, living with an impossible truth. The wind outside picked up, rattling the single pane of glass in my window with renewed force. It sounded like a moan, a long, drawn-out sigh from the ancient forest. A shiver ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from a familiar sense of being watched. It was the same feeling that had stalked me for decades, a subtle pressure from the dense thicket of firs and hemlocks. They were still out there, silent sentinels, and now, My story was out there too. I wondered if they knew, if the act of speaking had somehow disturbed the delicate balance I had maintained for so long. I closed my journal, the leather soft and familiar under my trembling hands. The phone buzzed again, Robert's name flashing on the screen. I ignored it. My focus was on the forest, on the unseen. I had made my peace with being alone, with carrying my truth in solitude. Now, it seemed, I had to make peace with the world's disbelief, and with the lingering possibility that my confession had not just brought scrutiny from humans, but from the very entities I had dared to reveal. Some truths, once spoken, cannot be unheard, and some secrets, once disturbed, never truly settle back into the shadows. My old flip phone, a relic I kept for emergencies, buzzed again a day after Robert's call. It was an unknown number, and I let it ring, watching the small screen vibrate on the worn wooden table. The silence of my cabin felt amplified, broken only by the crackle of the hearth fire. My conversation with Robert had left a sour taste, a reminder of the chasm between my reality and the world's need for neat, scientific explanations. He meant well, I knew, in his own way, but his concern felt like an accusation, a judgment on my sanity. He just couldn't see the unseen. No one ever could. My days, even after my online confession, fell back into a familiar rhythm, a careful dance between routine and the lingering unease that hummed beneath the surface of my skin. Each morning, I would rise before the sun, the cabin air crisp and cold, and prepare my simple breakfast. Then, I'd bundle up in my worn winter gear, grab my old canvas bag, and head out into the snow-covered woods. My primary task, the one that anchored me to a semblance of my former scientific life, was checking the remote trail cameras I had meticulously placed throughout my section of the wilderness. It was a monotonous ritual, usually yielding nothing more exciting than a deer grazing, a curious fox, or the occasional elusive mountain lion. Yet, I performed it with the dedication of a man whose life had been stripped bare, leaving only his purpose. One particular Tuesday, the air was unusually still, the kind of silence that presses in on you, making your own heartbeat sound unnaturally loud. My breath condensed in sharp puffs as I trudged through the deep snow, the only sound the crunch of my boots. I reached the camera mounted on an ancient Douglas fir, its trunk scarred by time and weather. My fingers, stiff with cold, fumbled with the clasp, and I carefully removed the SD card. Back in the warmth of the cabin, with a steaming mug of black coffee cradled in my hands, I inserted the card into my old laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying a grid of thumbnail images. I scrolled through the usual parade of forest inhabitants, a family of elk moving gracefully through the trees, a lone wolf with eyes like amber, a black bear lumbering past, its fur thick for the winter. Then, my thumb froze. A single image, stark and terrifying, filled the screen. It was taken a few nights prior under a full moon, the snow glowing with an ethereal light. In the center of the frame, a colossal bipedal figure, impossibly tall, was captured. It was not a bear. Its posture was distinctly upright, its form muscled and covered in dark, matted hair. But the sheer bulk, the undeniable human-like stride, sent a jolt of pure dread through me. My eyes darted to the object it was dragging, a dark, indistinct mass, half buried in the pristine white snow, leaving a grotesque furrow behind it. It was too large to be an animal carcass, too awkwardly shaped. A wave of nausea washed over me, the coffee suddenly bitter on my tongue. My scientific mind, honed by decades of observation and rational explanation, screamed in protest. This defied every known biological classification, every natural law I understood. This wasn't an animal. This was something else entirely. Something ancient, powerful, and utterly out of place. I replayed the short video clip, my breath catching in my throat. The figure moved with an almost deliberate slowness, its head occasionally turning, as if scanning the dark woods. There was a deliberate, almost watchful stillness about it, despite the heavy burden it pulled. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence of the cabin. The screen, usually a window to the predictable movements of nature, had become a portal to an unsettling truth. I zoomed in, pixelation blurring the details, yet sharpening the terror. The sheer scale of the creature was staggering, easily over 9 feet tall, its shoulders broad and powerful. Its gait was human-like, a heavy, measured shuffle through the deep snow. But the hair, the bulk, the primitive power radiating even from a grainy image, screamed something ancient, something that should not exist in our modern world. My gaze returned to the unidentified mass it dragged. It was dark, irregular, and seemed to be wrapped or partially covered, leaving a distinct, deep trail in the snow. A primal fear, cold and sharp, coiled in my gut. What was it dragging? A deer, perhaps? No, the shape was wrong, too dense, too deliberate. It evoked a disturbing image of something heavy, something lifeless, being purposefully removed. The thought made the hair on my arms stand on end. I felt a wave of profound nausea, the coffee now a bitter metallic taste on my tongue. My mind, trained for years in scientific observation and rational explanation, rebelled against the image. This defied every known biological classification, every natural law I understood. This wasn't an animal. This was something else entirely. Something ancient, powerful, and utterly out of place. I replayed the short video clip, my breath catching in my throat. The figure moved with an almost deliberate slowness, its head occasionally turning as if scanning the dark woods. The silence of the forest in the video was absolute, broken only by the muffled crunch of its massive feet in the snow. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a feeling I hadn't experienced since that night so many years ago when I first encountered the impossible. It was the same unsettling presence, the same profound sense of being watched, of being an intruder in a world far older and stranger than my scientific textbooks had ever described. My father always told me, some truths are best left undisturbed in the dark. I had lived by that wisdom for years, burying what I had seen, allowing the world to believe its convenient fictions. But this footage, this was different. This was irrefutable, undeniable proof captured by my own equipment. The world was not ready for this, and frankly, I wasn't sure I was either. Yet, a different kind of curiosity, one that had been dormant for too long, began to stir within me. It was the thrill of the unknown, the drive that had led me into the wilderness in the first place, before the awe turned to dread. I closed the laptop with a snap, the screen going dark, but the image remained burned into my mind. The cabin, usually a sanctuary of quiet solitude, suddenly felt small and exposed. The wind outside seemed to howl with a new, menacing tone. I walked to the window, peering out into the twilight, the fir trees standing like dark sentinels. The familiar landscape now held a new, sinister secret, one that my trail camera had unwittingly exposed. My hands, though no longer gnarled from decades of isolation but still marked by years of outdoor work, trembled slightly. I was no longer just an observer. I was a witness, and the truth once glimpsed demanded to be fully seen. I had to go back. I had to find out what that thing was, and what it was dragging. The forest called to me not with the gentle whisper of scientific discovery, but with the chilling promise of a terrifying investigation. The decision, once made, settled in my gut like a cold, hard stone. My scientific curiosity, long dormant in the face of what I'd witnessed 40 years ago, now surged with an almost desperate energy, overriding the primal fear that clawed at my throat. I knew the risks. The image of that colossal figure, its bipedal gait unmistakable, haunted my every thought. But the unknown mass it dragged, half hidden in the snow, gnawed at me with an even deeper terror. I needed answers not just for my own sanity, but for the impossible truth that pulsed beneath the surface of this ancient wilderness. I spent the next hour meticulously preparing. My old hunting pack, a faded green canvas bag that had seen countless treks through these woods, lay open on the worn kitchen table. I packed a thermal flask filled with hot coffee, a small survival kit, a powerful flashlight, and extra batteries. My old binoculars, a heavy pair with scratched lenses, found their place alongside a compass and detailed topographical maps of the area. I double-checked the .30-06 rifle, a familiar weight in my hands, loading it with precision. It was not for hunting, not anymore. It was for protection, a desperate measure against an unknown force. The irony was not lost on me. I was a researcher, not a soldier, yet the forest was forcing me to become both. The air outside the cabin was sharp and cold, biting at my exposed skin as I stepped out into the night. The full moon, the same one that had illuminated the creature in the video, now hung low in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows of the fir trees across the snow. The silence was profound, heavier than usual, almost suffocating. It felt as if the forest itself was holding its breath, aware of my intrusion, aware of the secret I was chasing. Each crunch of my boots on the frozen snow echoed unnaturally loud in the vast quiet, a stark reminder of my solitary journey. My journey back to the trail camera's location felt different this time. Every snapping twig, every rustle of dry leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. My senses were heightened, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line, searching for any movement, any break in the monotonous pattern of the forest. The wind, usually a comforting whisper, now seemed to carry an unseen threat, a low moan that chilled me to the bone. I remembered Robert's call, his voice laced with concern, his scientific mind unable to process anything beyond the realm of known biology. He would call this a breakdown, a delusion, but he hadn't seen what I had seen. He hadn't felt the cold dread that the creature's image had imprinted upon my soul. I reached the ancient Douglas fir where the camera was mounted, its massive trunk scarred by time. The snow around it was undisturbed, pristine save for my own footprints. The creature's trail, the deep furrow left by whatever it dragged, was nowhere in sight. The forest had swallowed its secret whole, leaving no trace for the casual observer. But I wasn't a casual observer. I was Richard. I was the man who had seen the impossible, and I knew what I was looking for. The air grew colder and a shiver ran down my spine. My father always told me, some truths are best left undisturbed in the dark. I had lived by that wisdom for years, burying what I had seen, allowing the world to believe its convenient fictions. But this footage, this was different. This was irrefutable, undeniable proof, captured by my own equipment. The world was not ready for this, and frankly, I wasn't sure I was either. Yet a different kind of curiosity, one that had been dormant for too long, began to stir within me. It was the thrill of the unknown, the drive that had led me into the wilderness in the first place before the awe turned to dread. Now, the dread had returned, stronger than ever, but it was coupled with a desperate need to understand. I had to find that trail. I had to follow it, no matter where it led. The forest held its breath, and so did I. I stood there, a cold wind whipping around me, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The pristine snow, a canvas of untouched white, stretched out, mocking my determination. The creature's trail, so clear and terrifying on the laptop screen, had vanished. The forest had reclaimed its secret, erasing the grotesque furrow as if it had never existed. My breath plumed in the frigid air, each exhalation a cloud of frustration. Robert's skeptical voice echoed in my head, a phantom of doubt. He would have told me to go home, to rest, to blame it on a trick of light or a tired mind. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew what I felt. The primal fear was real, a cold, hard knot in my stomach that resonated with memories decades old. My gaze swept the area, methodical and slow, like a predator searching for tracks. I moved in a widening circle around the Douglas fir, my eyes scrutinizing every shadow, every subtle depression in the snow. The silence was absolute, heavier than any I had ever known, broken only by the crunch of my own boots and the frantic beat of my heart against my ribs. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The air grew colder, biting at my exposed cheeks, a sharp reminder of the unforgiving wilderness that surrounded me. I pulled my wool cap lower, tightening the scarf around my neck. Then a faint, almost imperceptible detail caught my eye. Not a track, Not a furrow, but a disturbance. About 30 feet from the camera, half hidden beneath a snow-laden hemlock, a patch of snow was different. It wasn't just undisturbed. It was compressed. A subtle indentation, as if something incredibly heavy had rested there for a moment, then lifted, leaving no distinct footprint, but a lingering impression. My pulse quickened. This was it. Not a trail, but a clue. A hint. I knelt, my gloved fingers brushing away a thin layer of fresh powder. The compressed snow felt unnaturally hard, almost icy, as if the immense weight had squeezed all the air from it. A faint, musky odor, something ancient and earthy tinged with a strange sweetness, drifted to my nostrils. It was not the scent of bear, nor elk, nor any animal I knew. It was alien, unsettling, and strangely familiar, stirring a deep-buried memory from my youth. A shiver, colder than the biting wind, ran down my spine. I remembered the summer I was a young man, barely 20 years old, fresh out of college and full of scientific ambition. I was a junior researcher, eager to prove myself, spending weeks alone in the Pacific Northwest wilderness, tracking rare bird species. One evening, deep in a forgotten valley, I had stumbled upon a clearing. The air was thick with that same musky, sweet scent. The trees around the clearing were unnaturally silent. And then I saw them, a series of impossibly large bipedal footprints, pressed deep into the damp earth. My heart had hammered then just as it did now. I had convinced myself it was a hoax, a trick of the light, a bear walking on its hind legs. I had to. The alternative was too terrifying. Now, decades later, the scent, the silence, the undeniable evidence was here again. The memory was no longer a distant echo but a roaring wave, crashing over me with the force of a forgotten nightmare. The hair on my arms stood on end. My scientific training, all those years of seeking rational explanations, felt flimsy, inadequate against this raw, ancient truth. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a mountain lion. This was it. The same presence, the same impossible reality that had haunted my subconscious for 40 years. The compressed snow pointed towards a dense thicket of spruce trees, a darker patch against the moonlit landscape. It was a narrow opening, almost hidden, a place where only something truly massive yet agile could pass without leaving a clear path. This creature was intelligent, cautious. It knew how to move through its domain without detection. My grip tightened on the rifle. It felt cold, heavy, but strangely comforting. A desperate measure, yes, but a necessary one. I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs. Each step into the thicket was a conscious decision, a crossing of a threshold. The spruce branches, heavy with snow, brushed against my face, showering me with icy powder. The world narrowed to the beam of my flashlight, cutting a path through the oppressive darkness. The musky scent grew stronger here, almost suffocating, a primal perfume that spoke of ancient forests and forgotten secrets. My senses were on high alert, every nerve ending screaming with a mix of dread and exhilaration. I was following the unknown, stepping into a reality that defied everything I thought I knew. My father always told me, some truths are best left undisturbed in the dark. I had lived by that wisdom for years, burying what I had seen, allowing the world to believe its convenient fictions. But this path, this scent, this undeniable presence pulled me forward. The forest no longer held its breath. It whispered, drawing me deeper into its heart, towards a confrontation I had spent a lifetime avoiding. I had to know. I had to see. The answers were waiting, hidden in the shadows, and I was finally ready to face them, no matter the cost. My journey into the true wilderness had just begun. The spruce branches, heavy with snow, continued to brush against my face, showering me with icy powder. The world narrowed to the beam of my flashlight, cutting a path through the oppressive darkness. The musky scent, that strange, ancient perfume, grew stronger here, almost suffocating. It hung heavy in the air, a thick, primal cloud that spoke of forgotten secrets and things that should not exist. My senses were on high alert, every nerve ending screaming with a mix of dread and exhilaration. I was following the unknown, stepping into a reality that defied everything I thought I knew. Each step was deliberate, my boots sinking into the undisturbed snow, each crunch echoing in the profound silence. The thicket was a labyrinth of shadows and gnarled branches. It seemed to swallow the moonlight whole, leaving me reliant on the narrow beam of my flashlight. The air grew even colder, a biting chill that seeped into my bones, despite the layers of thermal clothing. I could feel my own breath condensing in thick clouds before me, a visible manifestation of my fear. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the otherwise absolute quiet. It felt as if the very trees were leaning in, their snow-laden limbs forming a canopy that blocked out the sky, trapping me in this alien world. I pushed deeper, my gloved hands parting branches, my eyes constantly scanning. The musky smell was overwhelming now, a sickly sweet and earthy odor that made my stomach clench. It was so strong it almost tasted metallic on my tongue. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than the cold, that I was close. Very close. The creature had been here recently, perhaps even moments before me. A shiver not from the cold ran down my spine, tightening every muscle in my body. Then I saw it. Not a footprint, not even the compressed snow from before, but something far more unsettling. About 15 feet ahead, a thick, ancient hemlock branch, easily 6 inches in diameter, was snapped clean off. It lay half buried in the snow, its splintered end facing upwards, jagged and raw. The break was too high for any bear, too clean for a natural fall, and far too robust for a human. It spoke of immense, raw power. A silent, terrifying declaration of strength. My flashlight beam lingered on the broken wood, highlighting the fresh, pale splinters against the dark bark. This was no animal I had ever known. This was something else entirely. My mind raced, trying to process the impossible. My scientific training, all those years of meticulous observation and rational deduction, screamed in protest, but the evidence was undeniable. This was a force that defied explanation, a presence that shattered the comfortable boundaries of my understanding. The primal fear that had been a dull ache now flared into a sharp, burning terror. I remembered the stories, the hushed whispers of old loggers and isolated rangers, tales dismissed as folklore and delusion. They weren't delusions. They were warnings. I tightened my grip on the .30 Euro 6 rifle, its cold metal a small comfort against the growing dread. It felt inadequate, a mere toy against the power that could snap a branch like that. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, every dark patch seeming to hold a hidden threat. The silence was no longer absolute. It was a living, breathing entity, filled with unspoken menace. I could almost hear the rustle of unseen movement, the heavy, deliberate shift of weight just beyond the periphery of my vision. My breath hitched in my throat. A low, guttural sound, barely a whisper, seemed to drift from the dense trees ahead. It wasn't a growl nor a moan, but something in between. A deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the very earth itself, rising through my boots and into my chest. It was a sound of immense power, of ancient lungs drawing air. My entire body froze. Every hair on my arms and neck stood on end. My mind screamed at me to run, to turn back, to escape this place that defied all reason. But another part of me, the part that had chased scientific truth for decades, refused. It was a desperate, almost suicidal curiosity. I had to see. I had to understand. This was the moment I had spent a lifetime avoiding, the truth that had haunted my subconscious for 40 years. My father always told me, some truths are best left undisturbed in the dark. I had lived by that wisdom for years, burying what I had seen, allowing the world to believe its convenient fictions. But this was different. This was here. This was real, and it was waiting for me. I took another shaky breath, the cold air burning my lungs, and pushed forward, deeper into the suffocating darkness of the thicket. The guttural sound vibrated through me, a deep hum that settled in my chest, a primal warning. My body screamed at me to retreat, to abandon this insane quest and run back to the safety of my cabin. But my feet, almost of their own accord, kept moving. The cold air, sharp with the musky scent, filled my lungs with each shaky breath. My flashlight beam cut a narrow, trembling path through the dense spruce, each tree a silent sentinel watching my foolish advance. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the creature was close. Perhaps it was even watching me now, a silent, imposing shadow among the shadows. I pressed on, my rifle held tight, its cold metal a grounding weight in my trembling hands. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of snow-laden branches made me flinch. My eyes darted from side to side, straining to pierce the oppressive darkness beyond the flashlight's reach. The thicket grew denser, the branches intertwining overhead, creating a canopy that felt like a cage. The moonlight, which had offered some solace earlier, was now completely swallowed by the ancient trees. I was alone, truly alone, in a world that defied all logic and reason. Then I heard it again. Not the deep guttural sound this time, but something softer, closer. A heavy, deliberate exhale, like a sigh. It came from directly ahead, just beyond the screen of thick spruce. It was the sound of a living, breathing being, massive and powerful, yet strangely quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that echoed in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, trying to reassert control, to silence the primal terror that threatened to consume me. When I opened them, my vision was sharper, my resolve, however fragile, solidified. I parted the last few branches, moving with agonizing slowness, trying to make as little noise as possible. The musky scent was overwhelming now, thick and almost sweet, like decaying fruit mixed with damp earth and wet fur. It clung to everything, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on me. My flashlight beam found a small clearing, no more than 20 feet across, ringed by towering hemlocks. The snow here was heavily disturbed, churned up and packed down, clear evidence of a large struggle or a prolonged presence. And in the center of that clearing, partially obscured by a fallen log, I saw it. The dark, unidentified mass from the trail camera footage. It was larger than I had imagined, a shapeless heap of matted fur and dark fabric, frozen solid in the snow. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't make out what it was, but the sheer size and the way it lay there almost reverently sent a fresh wave of dread through me. It looked like a large animal, perhaps a deer, but something about its unnatural stillness, its dark, almost charred appearance made me doubt. My gaze swept the clearing, searching for the creature itself. The air was still, heavy, charged with an unseen presence. I felt a pair of eyes on me, an intense, ancient gaze that seemed to pierce through the darkness and into my very soul. My father always told me, some truths are best left undisturbed in the dark. I had lived by that wisdom for years, burying what I had seen, allowing the world to believe its convenient fictions. But here, in this frozen clearing, with the evidence of the impossible laid bare before me, I knew I had crossed a line. There was no turning back from this truth. A faint glint of red, deep within the shadows at the edge of the clearing, caught my eye. It was momentary, like a reflection of distant embers, but it was there, and then it was gone. My flashlight beam swung wildly towards the spot, but found nothing but the dark bark of the hemlock trees. Was it an optical illusion? My mind playing tricks on me? Or had I just seen the creature's eyes, watching me from the depths of the forest, observing my every move with an unnerving, patient intelligence? The cold seeped deeper into my bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I felt exposed, vulnerable, a tiny, insignificant human standing in the domain of something ancient and powerful. My scientific curiosity still burned, a desperate flame in the face of overwhelming fear, but it was now tinged with a profound sense of foreboding. I was no longer just tracking an unknown species. I was intruding on something sacred, something that perhaps had always existed, hidden just beyond the veil of human understanding. The silence returned, deeper and more profound than before, a suffocating blanket that seemed to press down on my very thoughts, daring me to speak, to move, to even breathe. I was trapped between my past and an impossible present. The answers waiting, just out of reach, in the heart of this ancient, whispering wilderness. I was trapped between my past and an impossible present. The answers waiting, just out of reach, in the heart of this ancient, whispering wilderness. My gaze remained fixed on the spot where the red glint had vanished. Had I truly seen it? Or was the strain of the night, the raw fear, finally breaking my mind? I squeezed my eyes shut, taking another slow, burning breath. The musky scent, now thick and cloying, seemed to fill every corner of the small clearing. It was a smell that spoke of primeval forests, of something ancient and unyielding. When I opened my eyes, the faint red glint was still gone. Yet the feeling of being watched intensified, a heavy cloak of unseen eyes pressing down on me. I swung my flashlight back to the dark mass, forcing myself to confront the most tangible piece of this impossible puzzle. It lay there, half hidden by the fallen log, a silent, menacing presence. My scientific curiosity, a stubborn ember in the hurricane of my fear, demanded answers. I had to know what it was. What had this colossal creature dragged through the pristine snow? My legs felt heavy, each step a monumental effort against the urge to flee. The snow crunched softly under my boots, a sound that seemed deafening in the profound silence. My rifle was still clutched tightly in my hands, its weight a familiar comfort, but my mind knew it was a false one. No bullet could truly prepare me for what I was about to discover. I moved closer, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, slowly revealing the grim details of the mass. It was not a deer. It was not a bear. As I edged closer, the shape began to resolve itself from the matted fur and dark fabric. My stomach churned, a cold wave of nausea washing over me. It was a human form, or what was left of one. The body was contorted, twisted at an unnatural angle, partially covered by what looked like a heavy dark canvas. The fur I had initially perceived was not fur at all, but thick, dark hair matted with frozen blood and grime. The fabric appeared to be remnants of clothing, heavy winter gear, now ripped and stained beyond recognition. My flashlight beam lingered on a pale, exposed hand, frozen solid. The fingers were unnaturally splayed, and the skin was a sickly, mottled purple blue. A sudden, sharp gasp escaped my lips, the sound tearing through the silence. This was no animal kill. This was something far more sinister, far more deliberate. The sheer brutality of it, the way the body lay discarded, sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. This creature, this Bigfoot, wasn't just elusive, it was dangerous. It was a predator, but not in the way any animal I knew was. I took a shaky step back, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that echoed in my ears. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn, to run, to forget everything I had seen. My scientific mind, which had pushed me forward, now recoiled in horror. This wasn't a discovery. It was a nightmare, made real. The musky scent, once merely intriguing, now smelled like death clinging to the air, suffocating me. I could almost taste the fear, sharp and metallic, on my tongue. Then a low, resonant growl, deeper and more powerful than anything I had heard before, ripped through the clearing. It came from directly behind me, vibrating through the ground, through my boots, and into my very bones. It wasn't a warning this time, it was a declaration. My blood ran cold. I spun around, rifle raised, my flashlight beam wildly cutting through the dense spruce. The glint of red, unmistakable this time, flared in the darkness, two burning embers watching me from the shadows. They were large, intelligent, and filled with an ancient, predatory patience. My hand tightened on the trigger, my finger instinctively curling around the cold metal. But I hesitated. Those eyes, they weren't the eyes of an animal. Not truly. There was something human in their depth, a terrifying awareness that paralyzed me. It was a look of immense power, yes, but also a chilling intelligence. A gaze that seemed to probe the deepest corners of my soul. It was assessing me, weighing my intentions, deciding my fate. My father always told me some truths are best left undisturbed in the dark. That wisdom, once a comfort, now felt like a curse. I had disturbed it, and it was watching me, waiting for my next move. The silence that followed the growl was even more profound, heavier, charged with an unbearable tension. I stood there, rifle aimed, flashlight trembling, caught between the horror of the body at my feet and the terrifying intelligence in the shadows. The cold bit at my exposed skin, but I felt nothing but the icy grip of fear. My breath hitched, forming small clouds in the frigid air, each one a testament to my fragile existence in this wilderness. I was no longer just a researcher. I was prey, caught in the ancient, unforgiving domain of something truly inexplicable. The answers were no longer out of reach. They were here, breathing down my neck, waiting to be understood, or to consume me whole. The air grew heavy, thick with the musky scent of the creature and the metallic tang of fear. My rifle felt like a toy in my trembling hands, utterly useless against the primal intelligence that watched me from the shadows. Those eyes, those burning embers, seemed to hold the weight of centuries, a silent judgment that pierced through my very being. I was a man of science, a researcher who had dedicated his life to understanding the natural world, but this defied every explanation, every theory I had ever held. This was not an animal. It was something far older, far more knowing. My breath hitched in my throat, each exhalation a cloud of vapor in the frigid air, a visible testament to my fragile existence. I could feel the creature's gaze tracing every line of my face, every tremor in my body. It wasn't just observing, it was assessing. My mind raced, desperate for an answer, a strategy, anything to break the suffocating silence. The body at my feet, a grotesque monument to a brutal act, screamed a warning. This entity was capable of immense violence, a predator unlike any other. I took a slow, deliberate step back, my boots crunching on the pristine snow. The sound seemed to shatter the profound stillness echoing through the clearing like a gunshot. The red eyes in the darkness remained fixed on me, unblinking. There was no aggression in them, not yet, but an unnerving patience. A stillness that spoke of absolute confidence. It knew I was trapped. It knew I was afraid. And it was waiting. My mind flashed back to my father, his weathered hands strong, his eyes always full of wisdom. He was a man of the woods, a true outdoorsman who understood the unspoken rules of the wilderness. He had taught me everything I knew about tracking, about survival, about respect for nature's raw power. My father always told me, some truths are best left undisturbed in the dark. I had lived by that wisdom for years, burying what I had seen, allowing the world to believe its convenient fictions. But here, in this frozen clearing with the evidence of the impossible laid bare before me, I knew I had crossed a line. There was no turning back from this truth. The words echoed in my head, a chilling prophecy of the nightmare I had unearthed. I tightened my grip on the rifle, my knuckles white. My finger was still on the trigger, but I couldn't bring myself to fire. What would a bullet do against something that seemed to exist beyond the realm of flesh and blood? What if it was a warning, a challenge, and my reaction would seal my fate? The creature remained motionless, a dark, imposing silhouette against the faint glow of the distant moon filtered through the dense canopy. I could almost hear its heavy breathing, a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to synchronize with my own frantic heartbeat. The human body lay partially obscured, a haunting presence that demanded my attention. I forced myself to look at it again, trying to discern more details, anything that could offer a clue. The dark canvas covering part of it seemed deliberate, almost an attempt at concealment, or perhaps a strange form of respect. The thick, dark hair matted with frozen blood was unmistakably human. The splayed fingers, the mottled skin. It was a scene of pure horror, a stark contrast to the serene beauty of the untouched snow. I had seen death in the wilderness before, the raw, brutal reality of predator and prey, but this was different. This was calculated. This was something beyond mere instinct. A shiver ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from the realization that I was standing in the presence of a hunter, a being that moved with purpose, with intelligence. My scientific mind, usually so eager to categorize and explain, was now overwhelmed by a profound sense of the unknown. I was a researcher, yes, but I was also a man, and the primitive part of my brain was screaming for me to run, to flee this impossible nightmare. Yet I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the spot, held captive by a strange mix of terror and an almost morbid fascination. I needed to understand. I needed answers, even if those answers threatened to shatter my reality. The creature shifted slightly, a subtle movement in the periphery of my vision. It was barely perceptible, a ripple in the shadows, but it was enough to send another jolt of adrenaline through me. The red eyes seemed to intensify, burning brighter, drawing me in. I felt a strange pull, a primal curiosity that warred with my overwhelming fear. It was as if the creature was inviting me, daring me to look deeper, to truly see what lay beyond the veil of human understanding. My flashlight beam wavered, casting dancing shadows across the snow and the terrifying tableau before me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry and aching. My voice, when it finally came, was a raspy whisper, barely audible in the vast silence of the forest. "What? What are you?" I asked, the words feeling utterly foolish as they left my lips. There was no expectation of a reply, no hope of a human response. Yet the question hung in the air, a desperate plea for understanding in the face of the inexplicable. The creature's eyes seemed to narrow, a subtle change that I interpreted as a flicker of something akin to curiosity, or perhaps irritation. The heavy breathing from the shadows intensified slightly, a low, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath my feet. It was a language I could not understand, but its message was clear. I was treading on sacred ground, and my presence was not welcome. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that my life would never be the same after this night. The wilderness, once a place of solace and scientific discovery, had revealed a dark, terrifying truth. I was no longer just a researcher. I was a witness, an unwilling participant in a secret that had been hidden for far too long. The answers were no longer out of reach. They were here, breathing down my neck, waiting to be understood, or to consume me whole. The decision was no longer mine. It was the creature's, and its ancient, intelligent gaze held my fate in its silent depths. It has been 40 years, and the forest still knows my name. The snow still whispers secrets I was never meant to hear. I should have died that night, but something else chose otherwise. If I told you the truth, you would not believe me. No one ever has. My name is Richard. I am 45 years old, a wildlife researcher, and for most of my adult life, the wilderness was my sanctuary. It was a place of order, governed by biological rules, a canvas for scientific understanding. I spent my 20s and 30s living out of a beat-up Ford F-150, traversing the Pacific Northwest, documenting everything from elk migration patterns to the subtle shifts in forest ecosystems. My days were long, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, the crunch of snow under my boots, and the quiet satisfaction of discovery. I'd sleep in remote cabins, sometimes just in the truck, listening to the symphony of the night, convinced I knew every sound, every creature. I was good at my job, meticulous, driven by a quiet passion that few understood. My marriage to Bianca had ended years ago, a casualty of my devotion to the wild, leaving a hollow space in my chest that the vastness of the forest could almost fill. The loneliness was a constant companion, but I found comfort in the predictable rhythm of nature. It was a world I could control, a world I could explain. Until that winter, until the camera. I was checking my trail cameras, a routine I'd performed hundreds of times, expecting the usual glimpses of deer, bears, or maybe a rare wolf. But this time, the footage shattered my scientific understanding. There it was, a massive, bipedal figure, clearly not an animal, dragging an unidentified dark mass through the pristine snow. My breath caught in my throat, my knees weakened. The hairs on the back of my neck rose, an old primal instinct screaming for me to run. This wasn't a bear, This wasn't a mountain lion. This was something impossible, something that defied every explanation I had ever learned. The terror of my past, a memory I had long buried, clawed its way back to the surface. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that my life would never be the same after this night. I had to go back. Driven by a mix of scientific curiosity and growing dread, I returned to the forest, following the creature's impossible trail. The snow was a canvas of fresh tracks, each one enormous, deeply pressed, far too large for any known animal. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the crunch of my boots. I noticed a massive branch, snapped clean off a spruce tree at an impossible height, splintered by a force that defied explanation. A musky, sweet, almost rotten scent hung heavy in the frigid air, thick and cloying. It was unlike anything I had ever encountered. Then a low, resonant growl, deeper and more powerful than anything I had heard before, ripped through the clearing. It came from directly behind me, vibrating through the ground, through my boots and into my very bones. It wasn't a warning this time. It was a declaration. My blood ran cold. I spun around, rifle raised, my flashlight beam wildly cutting through the dense spruce. The glint of red, unmistakable this time, flared in the darkness, two burning embers watching me from the shadows. They were large, intelligent, and filled with an ancient, predatory patience. The silence that followed the growl was even more profound, heavier, charged with an unbearable tension. I stood there, rifle aimed, flashlight trembling, caught between the horror of the body at my feet and the terrifying intelligence in the shadows. The cold bit at my exposed skin, but I felt nothing but the icy grip of fear. My breath hitched, forming small clouds in the frigid air, each one a testament to my fragile existence in this wilderness. I was no longer just a researcher. I was prey, caught in the ancient, unforgiving domain of something truly inexplicable. The answers were no longer out of reach. They were here, breathing down my neck, waiting to be understood, or to consume me whole. The air grew heavy, thick with the musky scent of the creature and the metallic tang of fear. My rifle felt like a toy in my trembling hands, utterly useless against the primal intelligence that watched me from the shadows. Those eyes, those burning embers, seemed to hold the weight of centuries, a silent judgment that pierced through my very being. I was a man of science, a researcher who had dedicated my life to understanding the natural world, but this defied every explanation, every theory I had ever held. This was not an animal. It was something far older, far more knowing. I took a slow, deliberate step back, my boots crunching on the pristine snow. The sound seemed to shatter the profound stillness, echoing through the clearing like a gunshot. The red eyes in the darkness remained fixed on me, unblinking. There was no aggression in them, not yet, but an unnerving patience, a stillness that spoke of absolute confidence. It knew I was trapped. It knew I was afraid. And it was waiting. My mind flashed back to my father, his weathered hands strong, his eyes always full of wisdom. He was a man of the woods, a true outdoorsman who understood the unspoken rules of the wilderness. He had taught me everything I knew about tracking, about survival, about respect for nature's raw power. My father always told me, some truths are best left undisturbed in the dark. I had lived by that wisdom for years, burying what I had seen, allowing the world to believe its convenient fictions. But here, in this frozen clearing, with the evidence of the impossible laid bare before me, I knew I had crossed a line. There was no turning back from this truth. The words echoed in my head, a chilling prophecy of the nightmare I had unearthed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. But I forced myself to breathe, shallow and quick. The creature's eyes, those twin embers in the gloom, seemed to burn into my very soul, stripping away layers of scientific certainty and leaving only raw, primal fear. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the frigid air and everything to do with the impossible truth unfolding before me. My rifle, once a symbol of protection, felt like a useless stick in my trembling hands. It was designed for bears, for cougars, for known threats. This was something else entirely. It was a sentient presence, ancient and terrifying, observing me with an intelligence that defied every classification I knew. I lowered my rifle slowly, the movement almost imperceptible, a silent plea for a moment of grace. The creature did not move. It simply watched, its immense form blending seamlessly with the deep shadows of the spruce trees. The musky scent, now tinged with something metallic and acrid, hung heavy around the dark mass at its feet. I could not bring myself to look at it directly, but the shape hinted at something disturbingly human, or at least something once familiar. It was a burden, not a kill. That distinction gnawed at me, a terrifying puzzle piece that refused to fit into any natural order. My father always told me, some truths are best left undisturbed in the dark. The words echoed in my head, a chilling prophecy of the nightmare I had unearthed. I had spent my life seeking understanding, peeling back the layers of nature's mysteries. But this was a truth that threatened to unravel me completely. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, locked in a silent standoff with an entity that should not exist. Then, with a slow, deliberate turn of its massive head, the creature melted back into the deeper woods, its form dissolving into the darkness as silently as it had appeared. The red eyes vanished. The oppressive presence, however, lingered, a cold, heavy weight in the air. I stayed rooted to the spot, listening to the silence, the absence of sound more terrifying than any growl. My legs felt like lead, my entire body screaming for me to run. But my mind was a whirlwind of questions, of impossible images. The body, the tracks, the broken branch. It was all real. It was all burned into my memory. When I finally found the strength to move, it was not to flee, but to cautiously approach the spot where the creature had stood. The snow was churned, deeply compressed, revealing impressions far larger than any bear paw. The ground was stained with a dark, oily residue, and a faint, sweet smell, like overripe fruit mixed with damp earth, clung to the air. The unidentified mass was gone, dragged away into the impenetrable depths of the forest, leaving only a faint trail of disturbed snow. I returned to my Ford F-150 that night, not to sleep, but to process. The images replayed in my mind, a horrifying loop of red eyes and an impossible figure. My scientific instruments, my cameras, my journals, they all felt like props in a play, utterly useless against the reality I had witnessed. The next day, I drove to the nearest ranger station, a small, worn-down building nestled at the edge of the sprawling national forest. Inside, I found John Davies, the local park ranger chief, a man I'd known for years. John was a practical man, a former military officer who believed in facts, not folklore. "Richard, what brings you in so early?" John asked, his voice calm, accustomed to the quiet rhythms of the wilderness. He was sipping coffee from a chipped ceramic mug, the scent of stale coffee and pine cleaner filling the small office. I sat heavily in the worn wooden chair opposite his desk, my hands still trembling slightly. "John, I saw something on my trail camera. And then, in person." I tried to keep my voice steady, but the words felt foreign, unbelievable even to my own ears. I described the footage, the enormous bipedal figure, the unidentified mass, the broken branch, the musky smell, the terrifying growl, and finally, the eyes. I left out the part about the body at its feet, afraid he would dismiss me as raving mad. John listened patiently, his gaze unwavering. He set his mug down, the clink echoing in the quiet room. When I finished, a long silence hung between us. He leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. "Richard, I know you. You're not one for tall tales. But what you're describing, it sounds like local legend, a bear on its hind legs, perhaps a very large elk, or even a hoax." He paused, rubbing his chin. "We've had reports of a missing hiker, Douglas Miller, from a few days ago, but that's a search and rescue operation, not this." He pulled out a map, circling a remote section of the forest. We've had some unusual bear activity in that sector, according to a few hunters. Could be a particularly aggressive grizzly. They can stand, and drag kills, or perhaps a stress, Richard. You've been out there alone for a long time. The wilderness can play tricks on a man's mind. His explanation was logical, grounded in the known world, but it felt hollow, utterly insufficient to explain the ancient intelligence I had seen in those red eyes. He offered me a warm meal, a place to rest, and a polite but firm warning to be careful. He also suggested I take a few days off, a subtle hint that he thought I might be experiencing exhaustion, or something worse. I knew he didn't believe me, not truly. How could he? I barely believed it myself. But the image of those eyes, the sheer, undeniable presence of that creature, was etched into my mind. I couldn't rest. The woods were calling me back, not with the familiar comfort I once knew, but with a terrifying urgency. I had to know more. I had to find answers, even if those answers shattered the very foundation of my understanding of the world. My father always told me, some truths are best left undisturbed in the dark. But I had already stepped into that darkness, and there was no turning back. The wilderness had revealed a secret, and now I was bound to it, an unwilling witness, a man haunted by a truth no one would ever believe.